I was asked to talk to you about LEED for community, which to me is LEED for neighborhood development. We currently do not have any LEED ND projects in the state of Michigan, but we have incubated and teed up 4 different projects in the region. One is around the train station in Dearborn, which is hoping as it gets evolved and developed to be a LEED ND Gold project. Another is on the southeast side of Detroit, which doesn't have a LEED ND goal at this moment, other than that's what the owner wants to do with the property. It's a 13-acre site right on Jefferson Avenue, and then back into the neighborhood. More on that, film at 11. Another project in Highland Park, and of course in downtown Ann Arbor, which is just kind of a natural LEED ND project all by itself. And Eastern Market, I'm sorry, the edge of Eastern Market. We had a work session with Dan Carmody and the designers for the Bloody Run Creek Greenway project, which some of you know about is a 3,500 acre redevelopment project on the near east side of Detroit that starts at the headwaters of the Bloody Run Creek and the Packard plant. And it runs down and through the Eastern Market, and the goal is to cut a canal where the DeQuinder Cut is for canoeing and kayaking from Eastern Market down to the river. It's an ambitious project, but it's really exciting to be a part of that. And of course, we would not even consider LEED ND on 3,500 acres. We're looking at about a 35-acre piece of that project, right at the edge of the Eastern Market. So time will tell how that goes. I'm not going to talk about those projects specifically, but what I am going to talk about is what is LEED for neighborhood development and how did it evolve? How did we get here? And I'm going to try to get you a little familiar with the standard and talk to you a little bit about how it relates to our region here and the important, to me, the important components. Everyone has a different approach to what are important credits in the standard. That's the problem with the standard. You can't get all 110 points unless you're just incredibly wealthy and incredibly lucky. We haven't had a client like that just yet, but we're working on it. So with that, we're going to get you familiar with it and compare it a little bit with other standards. We're going to talk about the prerequisites. We'll talk a little bit about the credits. And the process of getting it registered is a little bit different for certification for LEED ND from other standards. And then question and answer. So with that, we all know urban sprawl when we see it. It's hard to quantify, it's hard to qualify, but we know it when it's there. What it embodies is single-use zoning, segregation of uses, and in most cases, the only way to get there is by a car. You go to your big box development. I've seen people bike to Oakland Mall even, but you look at that sea of parking around there, it was designed for an auto-centric society. We want to change that. We want a people-centric society. Dad blasted. So this slide's a little bit old. This is from the National U.S. Green Building Council, the original LEED ND, but I leave it in here because it tells a pretty important story. I hear a lot of people talk to me about, well, why should we bother with our emissions? Nobody else is doing anything. If you look at China's emissions, they are way less than the United States, approximately half of the US. And if you look at India, it's even less than that. So we're still the big polluter on the block, although I have news when it comes to renewable energy and energy efficiency. I was telling Peggy, I didn't get to finish the story, but I ran into Ed Masri at CNU 23 down in Dallas a couple of weeks ago. And as part of his presentation, he had just come back from the European Union, meeting with them, and they were all talking about, well, why should we bother with renewable standards? Why should we bother with carbon emissions? What's the United States doing? Well, his very first slide showed what the United States was doing, and I haven't been able to get that yet, but it's coming. The United States now produces more renewable energy than the entire European Union combined. And he said when that was told, the conversation changed at the meeting, and the European leaders said, wow, maybe we should rethink this. In particular, Angela Merkel, the Chancellor of Germany, thought, well, maybe we need to rethink our cutback on our subsidies for renewables because as a lot of people know, Germany's been on the forefront. They get 30% of their energy from renewables. By 2050, they're hoping to have 50% of their energy from renewables. But they're cutting back on the subsidies. They said they're already there. And then they saw what was happening in the United States, particularly in the Southwest, and they said, well, maybe we do need to make a difference. So the conversation, he said, changed and did a 180 there, and it wasn't pointing fingers at the United States. Everybody was pointing fingers at themselves, like, what can I do? And that's where we really have to get with this. What can I do? I don't want to point fingers at China or India. Yeah, there are problems there. There are problems here. You know, I try to hold my breath every time I go over the I-75 over the Rouge River, that complex there. I can never do it, but I don't know what I'm breathing in there. But when I see green smoke coming out of a chimney, I'm concerned. So we have problems here, and we need to clean them up. Now, this next slide talks a little bit about what happens if we change our development paradigm. If we go from 8 dwelling units per acre to, say, 60 dwelling units per acre. Transportation costs are reduced drastically. And this talks about carbon dioxide emissions, but carbon dioxide emissions are a byproduct of the money we spend at the gas pump, the money we spend at Consumers Energy, the money we spend at DTE. So if you bring those down, you're bringing your bill down as well. But it's a drastic difference if we just change that paradigm. Now, developers like 8 dwelling units per acre because that's what they're used to. That's what all our sprawling subdivisions are, from 5 to 7 to 8 units per acre. Kind of neighborhoods we envision have 60 units per acre, and they don't have to be horrifying. They're compact, they're not necessarily dense, they're vibrant, they're walkable, and I'm going to show you a couple of ideas along that line. Location efficiency, this is from my friends in New York, Jonathan Rowe's company. If we just go from a single-family detached unit, like the 8 dwelling units per acre, you can look at the million BTUs that we're buying and spending per year. We turn that into a tighter, more compact transit-oriented development. You can go from 240 million to 147. If you change that from single-family detached to duplexes and triplexes, you can reduce it even more. But if you get down into a real transit-oriented development, which is all multifamily development without single-family homes, you reduce that even drastically, even more. And then you bring the compactness of a transit-oriented, walkable, vibrant neighborhood, and you can reduce that from 240 down to 93 million BTUs per year. That's a lot of dollars that we're throwing away, and they're just going up in smoke, literally. So this is a typical geography of nowhere kind of project for those who are familiar with his work. There really is no way to walk in this neighborhood. You've got to drive. You see the corner is now a parking lot. There is a crosswalk and a stoplight. That's kind of good, but you notice there's no people standing there. This is in Denver. But what would happen if we rezoned it and changed our ordinance to allow for some more compact development, and we allowed for mid-rise buildings, which we don't allow for in most of our codes right now, and we were allowed to build up to the sidewalk? Most of our codes have a setback requirements. We advocate for a build to line where you build up to something rather than push back from it. And the reason we set back so far, I have to give you the history. I know our friends from Ford Land are here. But when the auto industry took off just before World War II, and then especially after World War II, people wanted safety. So if you push the building back, if you come to the stop sign or the stoplight with your car, you can see a quarter mile down the street because cars are going 45 miles an hour. Well, we're saying let's slow that down. Let's bring the buildings to the front of the street. Let's slow the traffic down, and then you don't have that problem anymore. And the way you do that is by introducing streetscapes, trees, street lights, simple elements that are down to a more human scale. So these towering freeway type lighting. And you can do this over time. It doesn't have to happen all at once. And then you add some people and some bikes. And the question is, would you rather have a neighborhood like this, or would you rather have a neighborhood like that? This is the same block. It's just morphed a little bit. Here's another example. This is Columbia Pike in Arlington, Virginia. Columbia Pike was one of the first LEED ND projects. It was in a pilot study. And I met the folks that worked on this down in Dallas as well. And I visited this neighborhood a few years ago, and it looks nothing like this anymore. It looks more akin to this. They're planning bus rapid transit. They're putting bike lanes on the street. They're putting in a median, they're raising the allowance of the buildings, and they're pulling the building to the street front. That's the same corner, believe it or not. That's the same corner in two different pictures. Would you rather have a corner like that or a corner like that? This is what they're building out right now. As a matter of fact, they even allowed for more if you add residential units, depending on the number of residential units. And this is the thing we really got to get a handle here as we're redeveloping the city of Detroit. The floor area ratio in a building, if you put too many parking spaces in your project, you get penalized. If you put more residential units, you get benefits. You're allowed to add another story. Here, the first thing developers ask for, where's the parking going to be? That's the first thing the city planners ask. Where's the parking going to be? Well, we're saying it's not that important anymore. We're in a different era. This is the 21st century. Parking is not as critical as it used to be. I drive for one reason. I have to. Give me public transportation, and I will park my car in the garage, and it will sit there ad infinitum, be one of those relics that they find after the great apocalypse. So, what is LEED for neighborhood development? For those of you, Patrick was around the beginning of the USGBC. I was around in the early 90s. A bunch of crazed architects at the AIA Committee on the Environment got together and said, we're not going to be able to fix this ourselves. Architecture alone can't solve the built environment problems. So we need to find a way to invite other professions in and other trades. How do we do that? Well, by charter, AIA couldn't do that. So the U.S. Green Building Council was created, became a 501c3, I think in 94, 95, but we started the conversations in 93, and then we started dealing with chapters, and Patrick's here was one of the founding members of the Detroit chapter back in 2001 and 2002, and we started thinking about it. But we invited other people, other professions, engineers, realtors, tradesmen, electrical engineers, civil engineers, landscape architects. Let's all solve this problem together. And then when LEED ND, we started thinking about, this is great that we're starting to get buildings that are energy efficient and compact, but we're still building in sprawling neighborhoods. We're putting them in office parks. You can only get there with a car, for God's sakes. So we partnered again with the Congress for the New Urbanism and the Natural Resources Defense Council and the USGBC to create a LEED neighborhood development standard. And this is what we get. We get smart growth, new urbanism, and green buildings. What does that all add up to? Something I don't think anybody can argue with, an improved quality of life. That's all we're trying to do is make life better. Are we perfect? Yeah, of course we're, no, of course we're not. I just see it if you're paying attention. Apparently you are. Okay, good. Okay, so smart growth, that's a word that gets bannered about. I got to tell you, I was in California, and I was working on a project. It was a TOD project in downtown Santa Barbara, and the old-timers were there en masse at a workshop, and one old biddy, she's just old crone, says, smart growth. Why do you call it smart growth? Sounds pretty dumb to me. So there's a lot of negativity attached with smart growth, so I want to talk a little bit about what smart growth is, and a little bit about what new urbanism, and a little about what green building are. Smart growth is transportation choices, less traffic, less congestion, people able to move back and forth, people on a variety of modes, bikes, public transportation, Ubers, zip cars, other ways to get around than just an automobile. It's about vibrant cities, towns, and suburbs. It's not anti-suburb. It's not anti-anything. It's all proactive. Let's move forward. And that's one of the things I like about Smart Growth America, who was a silent partner in this project, is let's put the positives forth. Let's let other people call the negatives, and we'll call them on it, but let us look at what we're doing positively. And it's a wider variety of housing choices. If you go out in Macomb, just even out here, you see the same house over and over and over again. Funny story about in Charlotte in my drinking days, I was living with my brother for a little while, and he moved into one of those sprawling subdivisions, and I came home at 2 o'clock in the morning, my key wouldn't work. And well, God, what did I do? Did I take him off? He changed the lock? So I'm banging on the door, and this guy comes to the door and says, what do you want? And I said, well, what are you doing in my house? And I looked at the number, and it was my house, but it was next door. And I was very embarrassed, I don't mind telling you, and I quit drinking after that. But your guy get killed doing something like that in the wrong neighborhood. Thank God my brother was in a nice neighborhood, but this guy woke up at 2 o'clock in the morning. And I did take the bus home. I did not drive. I see everybody looking at me. So what's new urbanism? The Charter for New Urbanism based on a series of principles, and this is all of them. Compact, walkable neighborhoods, mixed use, urban form. We're looking at traditional ways, looking at the way, what do we like about the cities that we love? What is it about them? What is about the shape and the form that excites us and makes us want to be there? And street networks that are well connected. Manhattan's a great example. If you have an accident on one block of Manhattan, you just take a right and a left and a right and you go right, keep going. We don't have that luxury here. We've broken up the grid so badly with large projects, starting with the Highland Park Ford plants, and now with Comerica Park and Ford Field. I'm not sure what they're going to do with Hockeytown, but I'm concerned that we're going to break up the vibrancy of the networks where you can't get back and forth. You know, if you look in the natural world, nature builds in, I'm looking at the cherry tree in the back there on that screen, and nature builds in redundancy naturally. When a cherry tree drops its blossoms and its pollen, there are thousands of potential new trees. Those that don't become new trees become food for the tree that's there. It's self-sustaining in its own site. We need to start thinking about that. So I'm not going to read all these. You guys can read as well as I can, probably better. So the benefits is a triple bottom line. That's one of the things I really like about LEED ND is that social equity, economic equity, and environmental equity are all, the 3 E's are all built right into the standard. People ask me, well, where's the equity? And I can point to credits that demonstrate that, and I'm going to talk about those in a little bit. So how's it different? Well, most of the LEED standards have 5 categories. LEED Neighborhood Development only has 3, but they're very robust. Smart location and linkage is probably the most weighted in terms of being able to get a LEED ND project done. But for me, neighborhood pattern and design is the most exciting. That's where I get to think as an urban designer and architect, how do I create this place? And then of course, infrastructure and green buildings. And of course, innovation and design process and regional priority credits. So it's the same numbers, 110 points. Don't let the 27 in smart location and linkage fool you. Those are the tough ones to get, so the weight is there, and we'll talk about that a little bit. Neighborhood pattern design, there's a lot of credits available, so you get some choices to pick from. And then of course, green infrastructure and building. Now I've looked at the requirements for green infrastructure and buildings, and you don't have to do a LEED building, but it does have to be a third-party certified building. Now, Global Green, or Green Globes rather, is the only other one that I can identify that would qualify, but I have no doubt as we evolve in this century, there will be other standards we can pick and choose from. I like LEED, I'm familiar with it. I worked on pilot LEED projects back in the 90s, and I've become very familiar with it. I worked on writing the LEED for Neighborhood Development Standard, and I love it. I'm just trying to get one started in Michigan, and it's very difficult. We got this adopted right in the middle of this crazy recession. We adopted it in 2009. And everybody said, where are you going to get money for a single building, much less a neighborhood? So that's what we're working on. So smart location linkage. You build compact neighborhoods, you don't have to sprawl out into the countryside. I showed this at one presentation, and developing the neighborhoods said, wow, look at that land. It's all gridded up for me already. I just got to build some houses and pave some streets. So I don't think we have to worry about that here. I think we're a little more enlightened now. This was a long time ago. So what's the intent? And I always focus on the intent of all the credits and all the prerequisites, because if you have a question about it, if you're thinking about it as a design team, if you go back to what the intention is, and if you look at the reference guides, there's always the intent of the credit. A lot of your questions can be answered by looking at the intent. So why does it matter? Well, this is why it matters. What we design, how we design it, will change the way people move, walk, drive, take public transportation, how they work, how they think, how they interact. As designers, I do not think we have stepped up to that responsibility, and I'll take the blame for that right along with everyone else. It is our responsibility to create places where people want to live, work, play, shop, dine, learn. And we haven't done that. We've responded. I remember one of my professors in school, many times we just respond to the developer's request or the builder's request or the client's request. And I remember the professor says, well, Bob, you're talking about a lot of things that the architect has no control over. You know, if you're asked to do a piece of property out in the middle of nowhere and you got to feed your family, you're probably going to do that. Well, I have to take issue. Jim, you're a great professor and good designer, but I take issue with that. We have to stand up and tell the client, what if you were to build a more compact building in a neighborhood that's served by public transportation, in a neighborhood that is walkable and bikeable and has access to cars and something beside the strip mall for lunch? It's our responsibility, and we haven't done that. We're starting to do that. I've been blessed. I was telling my friend Jason there from Ann Arbor, I don't have to take projects that aren't sustainable. And I get choked up when I think about it, but the reality is, client asks me, well, what about green? You haven't said anything about green. And my response is always the same. Well, I assume that that's the reason you called me, because it's the only way I know how to design anymore. I don't design big box stores, and I don't design tract homes that aren't passive and that don't use less energy. And I've been blessed, I've been able to do that. It gets me to work in the morning. Between accidents and falling out of buildings and stuff anyway. That to me is the most important thing about this. Let's talk about the health. This is social equity built all into it. This is about people. It's not about just the built environment. I'm always asked how big it has to be. Anything from 2 buildings, 2 habitable buildings, they're usable, in other words, not a warehouse, up to 320 acres. And I talked to Sophia Lambert when she was the staffer in Washington on the LEED ND team, and what they really came up with 320 acres is that's about the limit of what you can manage. If you try to get much bigger, your design team is going to have to be, instead of a team of 3 or 4 architects, you're going to have 7 to 10 architects, you're going to have 20 engineers, and you're never going to arrive at consensus, and it's going to be difficult to build. And this is one of the things I like, and we injected this intentionally. It does not have to be in the downtown or the midtown or in an existing urban neighborhood. It can be in the suburbs, it can be in a village hub in the countryside. If you look at the CDAD typologies for Detroit neighborhoods, there's lots of village hubs in there. Our team is working on design guidelines for CDAD's typologies right now. And I can tell you there's a lot of places in Detroit where you can insert a LEED ND neighborhood. The key is we want to build on infill sites, but you can build adjacent to a previously developed site, but you have to build on a site that has existing or planned and budgeted wastewater, water, sewer, electrical. The infrastructure has to be budgeted or built already. You can't go out, here's the example that I love is Vistion Village outside of I-275. It would never qualify as a LEED ND project because they had to extend all the services out there, and they were never budgeted for. They were just built for that project. So if it's budgeted, it's fine to be outside of that, but you have to be adjacent to an existing previously developed site or on a previously developed site. Is that clear enough? You guys know what I'm saying? So this is the intent. Again, proximity to existing development, proximity to goods and services, and you have to map these things out. Draw out your site plan and how far are you walking to get to the corner drugstore? How far are you walking to get to healthcare? And all these services are listed that you have to have access to. So you're not going to build in a greenfield just because you'd have to build all that stuff too. And then again, proximity to existing infrastructure. And the idea is not only to measure the location, but to enhance it. You cannot build on environmentally sensitive lands. If it's in a 100-year floodplain, it's not going to get qualified. And you want jobs near the housing. You don't want to have to drive 20 miles to cars. I had to take the car here, and I had to get on 696. I was kind of, I was like, am I going to get here in time? Thank God I had the time wrong, so I had plenty of time to sit on I-696 in that parking lot for 20 minutes. Don't want to have to do that with a LEED-ND neighborhood. And provide bicycle amenities. And bicycle amenities don't mean a bike rack. That means a place when you get there, you go in and take a shower and clean up if you get all sweaty before you go to work. Unless you're doing construction, then it doesn't matter. So that's the prerequisite one, is smart location. Development within and near existing communities and public transit infrastructure already in place. I should add that. Or planned and budgeted. You know, we're working on the RTA right now. It's developing a plan. When that plan gets enacted into law, everything along those routes they're talking about will qualify for the smart location linkage. And the second goal are specific protections. There are two groups in the prerequisites. The specific protections, like I said, imperiled species and ecological communities. You cannot build on a site where you have habitat that's indigenous to it. Agricultural land has to be preserved. Thank God we're putting agricultural land back in Detroit. We don't talk about Detroit as a food desert anymore. We talk about places in Detroit as a food oasis, thank God. And you can't build on a floodplain. You know, if it's underwater, a lot of New Orleans would not qualify for a LEED-ND neighborhood. And there was a lot of us down there when we did the charrette that said, you don't want to rebuild this the way it was. You need to get off of these floodplains because it's insanity. It's going to happen again. And arrogant as we are, we believe we can build levees and dams and dikes. I got a friend in Miami, and they're working on a plan for dikes around Miami so that as the sea rises, water doesn't come in. And she, a little bit of a geologist, she said, wait a minute. Miami is built on sandstone. It's all porous. The water's just going to come right under the thing. You got to go mile deep with concrete if you're going to try to block the seawater. So we need to rethink where we're building and how we're building. Florida's the only place I know where they're building more land, by the way. I lived in an apartment on new land at Jacksonville Beach, and I walked out my back patio one morning to greet Mother Nature, and there was about a 16-foot bull alligator in my backyard because it was his yard. And I never walked on that patio again. He scared them. Those guys are loud. And when they tell you to go away, you go away. So that was obviously built on a floodplain. And then back to group one, the preferred locations. Existing cities, existing suburbs, existing towns. Let's not go out and build these lifestyle centers out in the middle of nowhere and provide all the amenities and call it sustainable. That is nothing short of insanity in my mind. We do encourage brownfield redevelopment. We've got a couple acres in Detroit we could probably do that on. Maybe a couple thousand acres in Detroit we could do that on. I know that 3,500 acres of Bloody Run Creek, they're working on getting 92% of it qualified as a brownfield redevelopment project. That's a lot of brownfield. Is anybody familiar with the Bloody Run Creek project in here besides myself and Peggy, those that were at our workshop? Yeah, I know Kevin was there. What it is the former dean of the School of Architecture at UAD, he and his partner were walking in the neighborhood there, and they noticed a manhole cover, and it said Bloody Run Creek Sewer. And they looked and said, well, what's the Bloody Run Creek? Well, starting in 1870, right after the Civil War, as we started to pollute the creek, the Corps of Engineers started burying the creek, and they culverted 100% of it, except for a little bit of it that's in the Elwood Cemetery. Elwood Cemetery is about the only place in Detroit that has its natural topography, because you can't level a graveyard. Detroit used to be very, very hilly. Corps of Engineers flattened everything out and filled in a lot of what's along the Detroit River, Hart Plaza, east and forward. That's why it's a nice straight line there at the riverfront. The riverfront was not that way. It was swampland. We had completely changed that, and we got rid of a lot of natural nesting places and habitats. The Milliken State Park is starting to reintroduce that, and I'm glad to see that. But they said, well, I don't know, but what is it? Let's go find out. So they went to the library, and they found that these two branches of the creek. And they've been working on Connor Creek daylighting, and they started thinking about what would happen if we were trying to daylight this creek. Well, could we get funding for that? Well, it turns out that a developer from Detroit, now based in St. Louis, that he was working on another project with, came to town and asked him if there's anything interesting on the boards. And he said, well, as a matter of fact, we got this creek project. We're thinking about daylighting. Really? So he walked them through where they were on it, and about 2 years later, this was back in 2004, they get a call from this developer, and he says, you know that creek project you told me about? I said, yeah. I said, well, I want to do it. And Steve didn't know what to say. He says, well, it's a big project. He says, this thing's going to cost billions. He said, look, I'm in my late 60s. This is my hometown. I want to leave something behind. I want to do it. So they started working on how they would do it. And they got funding from the developer. They got funding from the Kresge Foundation and the Community Foundation of Southeast Michigan to start to look at it. And you can Google it now and find it on the web, and some really cool, edgy pictures that the Detroit Collaborative Design Center did that start to show what can happen when you daylight that creek. You bring in renewable energy, you bring in wind power, you bring in solar power, you create retention ponds that separate the stormwater and the sewage, which is, I think it's about a $50 billion fine we pay the EPA annually in Detroit for our overflows. It's a lot. It's more than we have. We get fined every year because our sewer overflows into the river, and that's not cool. Don't eat those fish. Anyway, and reduce locations with automobile dependence. That's, you know, I got to tell you, I got off the plane when I first came to Detroit in '92, and I had my portfolio. I was going to UD to see if they would accept my drawings and accept me in the School of Architecture. And I got off the plane and I walked up to a kiosk at the old airport there, and I said, excuse me, you tell me where I get the train to go downtown? And I will never forget the reaction. The woman literally pushed herself back on her chair, backed away from the front of the desk. And they got her out long beard, ponytail back then. She said, sir, this is Detroit. Where do you think you are? Well, I thought it was Detroit. I can't get a train here? She says, no, we're the Motor City. You can get a car. And I learned about concessions at the airport. Got to take a metro car. Can't even get a cab at the airport legally. So we got a lot of policy things to work on, a lot of things that have to change, a lot of things that we're beholden to that are not healthy. And then bicycle network and storage. Shared use bike paths are critical for this kind of thinking. And then the third group are land uses. You know, what's near our project? What are you near? How are you getting there? We talked about that a little bit before. And then this is critical also on the smart location linkage. How are we protecting the environment? How are we setting aside lands? And one of the cool things that we looked at on the Bloody Run Creek is how could we set aside land and create new nature conservancies that don't exist now and set that land aside in perpetuity, get a nature conservancy such as Six Rivers or the Nature Conservancy to partner with to adopt a brand new nature conservancy in the heart of the city of Detroit. That kind of stuff gets me out of bed in the morning. That is exciting kind of work for an old burnout architect builder. And then neighborhood pattern and design. This is where we start to look at what we build. You know, we looked at where we build it just a little bit, and I'm not going to go into detail on all this because I could go on forever. I love to talk about this stuff. I'm trying to be as concise as I can and respectful of the time. But that was where we build. Now this is what we build. What kind of pattern are we creating? Do we want to create the kind of place that people want to be? Obviously, this is the kind of place that people want to be because there's a farmer's market there and this takes place every day. And there's a lot of variety. I mean, there is no limit what you can have. The NPD section reminds us that real neighborhoods have a unique character. There's a flavor about them. And there's only one way to find that flavor, and that's to go in the neighborhood and work with the people that live and work there. We cannot, as developers, anymore afford to go into a neighborhood and say, this is what you need. We need to go into a neighborhood such as Brightmoor or Jefferson East or whatever neighborhood you're thinking of and say, What do you know you need, and how can I find a way to design and provide that for you? That's a paradigm shift for us as designers. We're not used to that. We're used to sequestering ourselves away and doing lots of research and try to determine the demographics and study the retail, and instead of asking people, what do you know you need already? And start from there. That's the starting place for any good development. As I said, we're still trying to reduce automobile dependence, even in this section. So, this is the kind of place that people want to bike to. These are the kind of places that have safe bike lanes. Coming through Chicago, I saw something that I really hope we're going to adopt here, and that's instead of the bike lane being adjacent to the traffic lane, the bike lane is separated from the traffic lane by a row of parked cars. The parallel parking is moved off the curb, and so the cars that are driving by would hit the parked cars rather than the cyclist. To me, that makes a whole lot of sense. I would rather hit an inanimate object than a human being, and I'm sure human beings prefer that too. So those are policy things that we have to work on. Mixed-use environments give us healthier places. The research has been done. As a matter of fact, I'm going to back up and eat my words here, because when we were studying LEED neighborhood development, we partnered with the Center for Disease Control, and they did a study that shows the difference between a walkable community and a drive-only community. And in every one of their studies, people were healthier. They were aging in place more. That's critical for us as we're looking at all us baby boomers getting old. I'm not real thrilled about the idea of living in an old folks home, but there's going to come a time when I can't take care of myself. I'd love to be able to take care of myself in my neighborhood. I'd love for my daughter to say, things have really changed in Detroit. I think I want to move back. Wouldn't that be cool? How many generations are we going to give up? Anybody thought about that? How many generations have we given up? And can we afford to give up any more? This is actually in Santa Barbara, this farmer's market. They have an organic farm market that rotates through Santa Barbara County, and every day it's in a different spot. And you get to know the vendors there, and you get to know what you're buying and who you're buying from. And you get to know the guys that are a little shady and the guys that are straight up and stand up. I thought I just showed that. I went backwards. Look at me. Still, we're trying to create compact development. If you look on the left and you look on the right, that's a duplicate picture in it, doggone it. These kind of neighborhoods are the places that people are excited to go to. One of our funders at Kresge lost all 3 of her kids, not dead, but moved, and they all moved to places. They're in their early 30s now. None of them has an automobile. They don't have the desire for one. In Southeast Michigan, AAA tells us that it costs $9,800 a year on average to keep a car on the road. That's a lot of money that can go into quality of life issues like going out to dinner, going to the movies, going to the play, going to the museum. You can't do that if you're spending that kind of money on a car. And the other issue with cars in Detroit is Detroit came about pre-World War II, and many of the neighborhoods don't have garages and don't have driveways. The only place to park is on street. The streets are fairly narrow, which is not a bad thing, but you don't want to half of these people have to get a car because they got nowhere to put it. What do they have to do? They have to move out and move to somewhere where they can have a car, where they've got the detached car garage, and they don't know their neighborhoods and their neighbors. This is just a simple diagram of the difference. The one on the left is they both have the market, the school, and the house in the center of the project. And the one on the left, if you're going to go to school, unless you're going to cut through somebody's property illegally, you're going to have to get in the car and drive around. If you want to walk through somebody's property and take a risk, then you can do that. But the other neighborhood has got those redundant streets, so you can go multiple ways to get to the school or to the market. You could actually walk or ride a bike. The scale on this, if I remember correctly, is the distance from the house to the school is 1/8 of a mile, and driving it is a little over 1/4 of a mile. I just hate this slide. I mean, it's just got no pictures, and I like pictures. The first group of MPD credits are about reduced automobile dependence, and walkable streets, compact development, mixed-use neighborhood centers. That's what we're talking about, all those uses in one place. Reduce the parking footprint. What if we don't need to build all this parking? I got to tell you a great story. Down in Midtown, fellow was hired by Wells Fargo Bank to appraise a potential project, and there was only one parking space per 2-bedroom unit. And the bank said, you got to get 2. We can't fund it. And they went back and forth and back and forth. It took them 6 months to convince the bank that people that were moving there didn't want to have a car. The parking space was more for a guest space than it was for the person that lived there. And they finally came to an agreement, but it was difficult. My friend had a hard time convincing the bank that you don't have to build for cars. You want to build for people. This is what neighborhoods need to be. So this was in Midtown Detroit. So we've made that small step there with a multinational bank. There's a lot of other banks we have to talk to. They know how to fund one type of development. We've got to work on that. I mean, you guys can read this as well as I can. 7 credits there. Number 8, transportation demand. How to reduce the daily trips. You know, we can reduce them. I fought for a 30% reduction. I didn't win. We got 20% reduction. But we're going to revise this standard here in the near future, and I'm going to push again for a 30% reduction. Jim and I don't get along. And the second group is the character. Now, this really gets into what we're doing and what we're building. Diversified public spaces, plazas, walkways. Think campus marshes. Think the Civic Center, the library, and the DIA. Think downtown Royal Oak. Think downtown Birmingham. Think downtown Ferndale. There's places where people want to go. You know, and traditionally, public spaces were set back a little bit from the street front. And that's because people traditionally gathered there. We stopped allowing that. If you go to a lot of these places, you find them fenced off. Campus marshes, thank God, is not fenced off. We fought hard for that with the Partnership for Public Spaces. But the zoning ordinance that we have to live with in most of these communities don't allow the kind of community that they always tell us they want. And we end up having to go before the Board of Zoning Appeals or the Plan Commission, get it rezoned, get a variance. Whereas if we changed our ordinance to allow form-based buildings, we wouldn't have this issue. Could save the developer a lot of money, a lot of time. And developers, by the way, I like that about them. They're smart. They know how to make money. And if you put too many roadblocks in front of them, they're going to walk away from your town. If you take those roadblocks down and give them a clear cut vision of what they want, and the best example I have to use is Birmingham. They adopted what's called a form-based code. It was a parallel code where they let the developer decide if they wanted to use the form-based or if they wanted to use the traditional zoning ordinance. And within 3 years, all the developers says, why would we want to use this traditional ordinance? It makes no sense. The form-based code gets pictures and graphics. You tell us exactly what we want. Our design time is reduced. We're not going before the Plan Commission every month. We're not going for variances anymore. So they've now thrown out their form-based code and their traditional auto-centric zoning ordinance, and everything you do is done form-based down in Birmingham. And not to celebrate Birmingham, but if you look at what's going on there, they are building left and right. There is an 80% premium in the market value of the projects there, of the buildings there, just because it's compact and walkable. That's a big jump. Why aren't we doing that everywhere in the state of Michigan? Well, that's what we're working on. One block at a time, right? And shaded streets, well, I can't go on enough about how comfortable it is to walk on a shady tree-lined street versus the Columbia Pike that I showed you to start with, where you're just there in the blazing sun and it's reflecting off the pavement and it's twice as hot as it was coming up on you. Third group is community building capacity. And here again, this is where we're really getting into social equity. This is where we're talking about, are we involving the community? I mean, there's actually a credit for a community outreach and a charrette process. And I don't mean an hour-long workshop where you ask people, do you like this? Can I get your public comments? This is a 3 to 5 day charrette where you actually engage everyone in the neighborhood, give them the opportunity, because everybody's on a different schedule. Let them come in and out of the room. You have somebody monitor it, make sure that everybody knows what to do. But you do this over a course of days, and that gives every single solitary citizen in that community the opportunity to get there, unless they're working around the clock. And I don't think too many people do that, but I've been known to feel like I've done that a couple of times. Whoops, well, I guess we're on the next slide. green building and infrastructure. We talked a little bit about that. It's a LEED Platinum building on your right, a LEED Platinum neighborhood on the left, and a LEED pilot project on the bottom. These are all LEED Silver and Gold or above. You know, I show this slide because what's important to quality of life, like it or not, we live in a Western capitalist society. Money comes in pretty handy here. And I always tell clients, you know, I got a note from a client that they said they wanted better insulation. So I called him back. I said, well, what does that mean? He said, well, I just want to have a better house that doesn't use all this energy. I said, so you want more comfort? And he thought about that for a second. He said, yeah, he said, I guess I don't care what the insulation is. I want the house to be comfortable, and I don't want to spend a lot of money to do it. So you figure out what you do. Well, now we're talking with him about a passive house standard where he doesn't buy any electricity off the grid. Because that money can go to something else. It can go to his kids' education. It can go to a college fund. It has quality of life implications. When we reduce all these necessary pieces of the infrastructure, we improve the opportunity for quality of life. We're not going to dictate that's what you got to do with the money, but if you save it, you'll find something to do. I always find something to do with the money I save. My house is 30% more efficient than when I built it. I'm sad to say that most of my clients' house are in the 90th percentile, 5-star, Energy Star, 5-star or above. I can't get that in my house because I don't have the money, but we're working on it. You know, we've added insulation, we've changed some windows around, and I realize that difference. You know, I went from $100 electricity and gas bill every winter to $70. You know, that's $30 a month in my pocket, man. That's money. I hate to say it, but in my little car, that's a tank and a half of gas. And the green infrastructure should be part of the neighborhood, not planted on it, not just, when I say planted on it, I don't mean not trees, but integrated into the neighborhood. Let it be a place where people want to go and they go naturally. You know, I talked with one landscape architect, he was working on a college campus, and he told the civil engineers, don't put any sidewalks to buildings. I want to wait and see where people go, and that's where we're going to put the walkways. That was illegal as could be. They would not allow it. You have to have paved walkways at the campuses in Michigan. So he had to go through a big drawn out process, and they piloted on one project, and they got to where now they just don't build sidewalks until they know where people go. Let's make sure we're doing the right thing. We can't see everything in our offices or in our heads as much as I like to think I can. You know, it's pretty arrogant of me to think I have all the solutions on my own. Some of the benefits we get, oh my God. It never stops. I mean, that's what I've been talking about. People want to be there. The economy grows. The environment is healthier. People are healthier. They get along with each other. One of the things I love about taking the bus, I used to go from downtown Ferndale to downtown Detroit every day, twice a day. I met people in Ferndale, I met people in Roanoke that I never would have met. I met people in Detroit that I never would have met in my little single-use car. And that's what social equity is about, is meeting people. As a matter of fact, one of these people became one of my best friends, and he was my best man at my wedding. When we create places that people want to go, people find a way to interact. We provide security and safety naturally. You know, every workshop I go to in the city of Detroit, that's the number one concern. We work with C down there, so well, we want to be safe, we want to be secure. Well, what does that mean to you? Well, the initial reaction is we want more street lights, we want wider sidewalks, we want building setbacks so we can see around them. And as we get working with them and talking with them, we find out that's really not what they want. What they want is other people to feel safe with. So people are safe with people. Like it, don't. The fact is, I believe that we were created a social animal. We interact with one another and we're healthier, we're more secure, we live longer. You know, my parents are both deceased, and we were of that demographic where my mom died from an illness at a young age, and my dad was in love with my mom. He died within 2 years, and there was nothing wrong with him. People interact with one another they live longer, they live healthier. We found that to be true. They say when the wife dies first, generally the husband is not far behind. But if the husband dies first, somehow the wife manages to go on. Must be a lot of older widows out there. Okay, so I've already showed you this slide, and I think I'm just about through. We backed up big time, didn't we? Assure that the building and the site perform as you design. Now, this is not the same as getting LEED certified and walking away. This is performance measuring over time. Does it really work the way it was designed? Are you doing that? I know Peggy's working on a 2030 district where they're benchmarking the energy and the water and the transportation use on an ongoing basis with buildings. This is what we've got to get to. I can design the most beautiful, most perfect net zero energy building in the world, but if it's not monitored and people at the facilities don't know how to operate it, it's going to go downhill. It's a fact. I am not God. I like to think I am. Ask my kids. But we need to stay on it. And construction activity pollution, we just did a LEED silver building over in Farmington Hills, and boy, the general contractor, he constantly got irritated with us because we were making sure that the barriers were up in the storm drains, that silt was not getting into the creek, and it wasn't getting in the stormwater system. And when we went for certification, we actually got a letter from the city of Farmington Hills that said his project was the most kept up in terms of soil and erosion and airborne policy, kept it wet down in the paved parts. And they wished everybody would build like that in Farmington Hills. And we didn't do anything out of what I would call just the way you ought to be building, doggone it. Resource utilization, surpass ASH rate by 10%. Our designs usually are 20 to 30%. There's more credits for that, more points for that. These are prerequisites, these are minimums. And minimum building water efficiency. And in your residences, use low flow faucets. Now we can get a lot better than that, as you'll see in the next slide. What if we had faucets and showers that turn off when you're not using them? I have that in my house, you know, when I lather up my head with my shampoo and I'm washing my head and washing the sweat and the grease out of it. I don't need the shower running down the drain. Doesn't make any sense. It's just a push of a button, the water stops. Oh, go figure. And then when I'm done lathering up or whatever I'm doing in there, then I turn it back on and I rinse off. I save money that way. That's the big thing. I put in a dual flush toilet, and that, you know, 20 years ago when we started doing this, you'd say dual flush toilet, and you'd say, well, that's Australia. You have to go to Australia to get that. Remember the Carmanos, I think it was, with the kangaroo on it? It's the only place you could get them. You had to import them from Australia. But now companies like American Standard, Kohler, everybody makes them available. And you can get them at Lowe's, for heaven's sakes. So this used to be cutting edge. Now it's becoming the standard. And I look forward to a day where everyone in the design world just designs to a LEED silver. That's the way we design. And I don't think that's too far off. Let's reuse what we have. How many buildings, how many historic places, you know, earlier slide in neighborhood pattern design, we talked about historic buildings and historic places. Historic places are the best anchors we can have. It's been proven over and over and over and over again that when we start with what we have, and I think that kind of goes back to biblical times when this crazy hippie named Jesus Christ was on the side of a hill, and he said, well, we got 5,000 people here and they're hungry. So, well, what are we going to do? He said, well, first thing he said, well, what do you have? Yeah, and one of the guys pulled out a couple of fish, and another guy pulled out a loaf of bread, and next thing you know, there was enough to feed everybody. It started with what they had. He didn't look up the sky and said, hey, Father, drop down a whole bunch of fish and bread here, will you? Started looking in their pockets, see what they had. Start with what you have. We've got a lot of wonderful historic places. That's where people naturally go. They're used to going there. Let's build off of those. I'm not saying everything has to be built to mimic that, and that's one of the things I like about new urbanism and LEED ND. A very contemporary, futuristic looking building can fit into a LEED ND neighborhood just as easily as a traditional 1918 design can. Probably easier for energy efficiency because the old ways of building they didn't think about that. But we can replicate it any way we want. But the pattern, that we create with our buildings needs to be somewhere where people want to be. Let's not tear up the site. I was brought on a project. You might be familiar with this, Patrick. It was the Detroit Lions headquarters. And the first thing the builder said, well, that seems like an easy one to get because it's all going to be landscape. And we went out there, looked at the site, and every square foot had been bulldozed. And I'm like, no, wait a minute. You didn't understand minimized site service. It doesn't mean after the construction. It means during the construction. Oh, we can't get that point? No, we can't get that point. That was, what was that, 15 years? I don't know when we built that. It was a long time ago. We were brought in a little late to make it green, but we did get it LEED certified, I was proud to say. Let's keep the rain on site. We did a project, went to the city, and they were having problems with people building their sites up a little bit, and water was running off onto the neighboring lot, and it's a rather wealthy neighborhood. The doctor living next door didn't like water going into his basement after the new house was built. So I'll never forget the city planning director says, I don't care what you build, but you got to show me how every drop of water gets off of every square inch of your property. And I said, no, it's my water. You can't have it. I'm going to show you how every drop of water goes into the ground on my property and nourishes the groundwater and nourishes the plants there. She said, I've never heard of anything so silly. And I said, well, now you have. It took us 6 months to get it approved, but every drop of water is accounted for and it stays on site. And that house, every single tree is a native plant, everything is indigenous, and everything's thriving. And there's no irrigation system. That was the first thing back up says, well, you have to have a 1-inch water line so you can put an irrigation system in. I said, I'm not going to put an irrigation system in. Well, everybody puts an irrigation system in here. I said, is that in the code? She said, well, it's not in code, but that's what everybody does. And I said, well, let's start something new. Let's not put in an irrigation system. Let's not have to water our plants once they're established. This was 2004. Now everyone's doing it in that town. Go figure. It's so simple. It saves money. It saved me money as I was a developer on that project. I didn't have to dig it up all the street and replace the line. 3/4 inch line was fine. And by the way, that house, 3,150 square feet, they spend $20 to $30 a month on energy in that house. And my house spends 70 and I'm 1/3 that size. So I can build it for you, I just can't fix mine. And then district. This is kind of a big deal with a lot of people. Oops. Let the buildings on the site address the energy harvested there. If you look at the Living Building Challenge, that started to get scaled up to a neighborhood scale now. You could almost call it the Living Neighborhood Challenge. You know, their thing is a petal of a flower because the metaphor is that flower harvests everything it needs on site, and all this waste is processed on site. It's all done on site, and there really is no reason why we can't do that. It is illegal to process your own sewage in Southeast Michigan. You have to tap into the Detroit Water and Sewer Department's sewer if you're in a LEED ND neighborhood. Now, in 10 years, I'd be willing to bet we're going to have that changed. So that's as far as I wanted to go anyway. Thank you for that. I needed that. There are a couple more slides on here, but I'm not going to go into it.